So, okay, we should be live right now. Are you nervous?
No.
No?
You know what's
Okay.
really weird? No. Lives, no problem. But
No?
recording Erin Kennedy's podcast 2 weeks ago, petrified. I don't know why. Lives are easy for me.
Yeah, same. You
Yeah,
can't
well,
take
it's
it,
not
just is
easy.
what it is. Hi, everybody who's tuning in. I'm here with David Hannan today. He's from Pathfinder Coaching. David is a longtime LinkedIn friend. This Friday Career Lunch Break is quickly turning into just me finally getting to talk to people who I've been LinkedIn friends with for way too long, and we probably should have done this much sooner. But
100%.
David,
Yeah.
I would love for you to start with just walking everybody through. If they don't know you and follow you on LinkedIn already, A, they
Yeah.
should be, but
Yeah.
B, tell a little bit about you and what you're up to.
So thank you for having me on. I've been a fan for some time, so this was an easy yes. So thank you for that. I normally I'll make this relevant to both you and I and your audience. I got into recruiting like everyone else on the agency side. I just fell into it. I was a corporate recruiter for a little while, and then I through some conversations and maybe back page classified ads. I'm aging myself. I kind of fell into it, and I started recruiting in the UK for a couple of years. Joined a small tech recruiting firm, about 6 people. We grew to about 24 recruiters in 2 years. .com bubble burst. We went south. I had a choice: visit New York or move back to mom's. It was no brainer. So I visited here, and my visit turned into 24 years now. So I got my first agency recruiting gig in 04 here in New York City. And I was there for 9 years and left in 2013 to hike the Appalachian Trail. I got as far as Virginia, missed home, came home, and started applying for jobs again. But 2013 was a really challenging year because when I came back from the trail, I couldn't find work, even though I had like 9 years of experience at a pretty big firm in New York City. I was applying to, back then, I think still today, some of the top firms in the agency world in New York City, Green Key being one of them.
Okay.
And I got ghosted twice. And I was like, I have 9 years of experience. How dare you? So, went through the whole thing, rejection sensitivity, the whole, woe is me, what's wrong with me, everything, right? As you can imagine. And then
Yep.
I realized that one of my best friends, Matt Vick, knew the internal recruiter. So I was like, hey, Matt, can you put a word in? Got an interview in a couple of days and then got the job. I was there for 5 years. So, I have a pretty steady agency recruiting background. I enjoyed it for the most part. The only real side of I ran a full desk, Erin, and you know what that means. I ran both the candidate
Yeah,
and
explain it
client
for
side.
people who are listening who might not.
Yeah. So typically there are 2 types of recruitment consultant that works in an agency. They either work on the candidate side only, and they're typically known as recruiters, and there's the people that work on the client, the business development side. And there are others that fill in a third bucket, which is full desk. So they work both the candidate and the client side, which I did for 16 years altogether, including the 2 years in the UK. But I didn't like the biz dev side at all. And I think because the way my brain works, and I'm sure we'll talk about, ADHD and how that affects me, and I'm assuming affects a lot of people who are watching and listening in. That kind of kept me in place for a long time. And I was in this trap of I wanted to get out, but all I really knew what to do well was recruiting. So I was like applying to other recruiting jobs, and I'd get interviews and they'd be like, what am I doing? And then I'd dread going on the interview. So I'd bomb it. And it was just this constant cycle. And then COVID happened. And look, outside of all the terribleness that we all went through, there's, I've had some time to look at the silver lining. And one of the biggest silver linings was it gave me an opportunity to pivot hard, kind of forced into the pivot, really, if I'm really honest. But yeah, without going into too much depth, I was asked one of the questions that I typically ask my prospective clients on my chemistry calls, which is, what's the one thing about your career that you've loved so far that you'd be disappointed in losing in your next job? And I was like, working with candidates. It was like easy, just like knee jerk.
Yeah.
And here I am 4 years later, career coaching. So that's me, ex-recruiter. I still think like a recruiter, Erin. Wild, right? I still think like a recruiter when I'm talking to people, whether they're a client, a prospect, a friend, family. I still think like a recruiter. I really enjoyed that the layered part of agency recruiting and all the
Mhm.
activity. I think that played really well into the way my brain works. So like
Mhm.
the complexity, the layers, the multiple spinning plates on a daily basis worked really well. I mean, I was exhausted when I got home, but like when I was in
Yeah.
10 hours,
Yeah, there's a
I
lot
could blow
of
through 10 hours and like done.
activity and feedback and things
Yeah.
to spend your time on. So I could see
Yeah.
where it
Yeah.
kind of scratched an
And my
itch
hyper
too.
focus loved that. But
Yeah.
there was an inverse
Right.
challenge with that too. But yeah.
Right.
Old recruiter, now career coach.
Yeah. And you know what? So I'm biased because that's my story too, is
Mm.
came from the world of recruiting, now doing career coaching. But I'll tell you, I really do think there's a lot of value in working with somebody who has sat in that seat where you've seen such volume of behavior, both from candidates and from clients, from hiring managers, right? Like you've had to, qualify requisitions and understand what they're looking for and
Mhm.
juggle that whole thing of like, it's in the job posting, but they're not really asking for it. And why does it look like this? And
Yeah.
what does it look like to prep your candidate for an interview? And so when you think about taking some of your recruiting experience and best practices, how do you think you're applying that best today as a career coach? Like, how does it make you stronger?
Question. Really good question. I think it's such a. I have like 5 different answers, but I'm going to keep this simple. I think
Yeah.
one of the differences that I enjoy bringing to the party, if you will, is understanding the process, understanding the moving parts that go on within the job search process. Because, I'm going to age myself now. I hope that people say, you don't look 53, but I'm 53 years old. I got into recruiting in the agency
You
side in
don't look
19.
53.
Bless
And I'm
you.
not just saying that because you're a guest.
I'll write that check later. But
Yeah, thank
I've
you.
been recruiting a long time, and from a hiring manager and corporate internal TA recruiting perspective, their thought process has never changed. We of course add in LinkedIn into their thought process, but
Mhm.
it's never changed. It's is the resume good enough? Get the availability. Now is the resume good enough? Does the LinkedIn match? Is it also still good enough? Get their availability. That's it. It's not really changed in all that time. But I understand the process, Erin, from the very first, resume in my inbox to helping them negotiate an offer or even get through challenges in their first 90 days after getting the job, after starting the job, right? And you know how
Mhm.
important that is too. So
Yeah.
I think understanding the full like I don't even have to think about the process. I just know where the bottlenecks are depending on what the person tells me. Like I can identify an issue super close by just understanding what problem they currently have. And it's
Yeah.
all about working backwards and how to kind of defeat or push through the bottlenecks because there are many of them. And they're all, human nuanced. The beat the bots thing needs to die already because you know better than I do. You worked in corporate. I was agency. I never really used the amount of or the volume of ATS you may have used or your colleagues in TA. But yeah, it's a human feelings, gut reaction fueled process that, I've used this recently about perfectionism and how especially folks with ADHD can like get really saddled into just like zero movement or zero motivation because there's just no that they're bogged down by this kind of indecision or this overthinking of everything needs to be perfect for
Mm.
old Erin who's looking at 1,000 resumes every week. It needs to be perfect, and every time I see the phrase "the system is broken," I really want to just take away the broken word and replace it with imperfect, because the system is not broken, the system is imperfect. And I think if people really understood that, it might help them kind of, mitigate some of the pressure that they self-impose because they're trying so hard to create a perfect resume and a perfect LinkedIn profile and a perfect interview speech. And right, I'm getting
Yeah.
overwhelmed just thinking about that because the system's imperfect. It is because it's run by humans. We're imperfect beings, right?
Yes. Yes. Like that, I think is the piece that people miss in the creating this like robotic world of machines that decide and the ATS and all of this kind of like structure and cold rigidity. these are humans, and humans are imperfect. Humans, we talk so much about biases and how we want to try to break down biases, but also when you're building a strategy, I oftentimes talk with my clients a lot about what are some biases that can happen and how do we proactively plan for those? Because sometimes, most of the time, we don't know we have the biases that we do. And so when someone picks a resume and they think it's a great fit, like you said, they're going through resumes and they're looking for things, and everyone reacts differently.
Yeah.
And so this idea of, again, going back to you as a recruiter or myself working in the recruiting industry as well, it's interesting to kind of understand the averages over time of how things behave most probably. And so then you can start,
most probably.
Yeah. Like it's a bit of a probability. Like we know that the middle, or this is sort of what's most likely to happen. And you're always going to have some fringe things. And that's why I always say, show me a resume rule and I'll show you someone who didn't follow it and got a great job. Or show me how to interview great and show me someone who didn't do that and they're going to get a job. And they're going to go, yeah, but I didn't do that. Right. Because the imperfect humans, right? You found a great match. But
that's a good point. That's a really good point. I think one of the biggest downfalls, if I can add to that, one of the biggest downfalls I see, or one of the biggest, one of the worst side effects of perfectionism in resumes specifically is by the time you think it's perfect, which how would you know? Because you're not a resume writer, right? One.
Right.
Two, you've wasted what? An arbitrary period of time while 50% of your competition has already applied to the job. So it's, there are a lot of, you raise a really good point. It is super nuanced and
it's like, I am not a sports person, but I will say it's like people who tinker with their resume. It's like you're picking out your bat and your competition is already swinging. And
I'm stealing that. I love that.
You may not. This is on record that this was mine. So if anyone sees David post about this, it needs to go trademark Erin Lewber.
Tag Erin so she can report me to LinkedIn.
I would never.
I love that line.
But it's true, right? You just get stuck, and that's what you're alluding to as well. Is like you just get stuck in this perfection and what is perfection and how do I? And instead, it's like know what the average is, know what's most likely to happen. Be strategic in how you create your version of this is going to speak to what people will most likely resonate with, and then get to swinging and stop screwing around with everything else.
Ship it.
Yeah.
Just ship it. And if you're in doubt, ask a friend. Look, everyone's got a friend of a friend who's maybe used a recruiter, or a friend of a friend who's used an agency. Ask around. A good friend of ours, Greg Roche, the introverted networker. There's a plug. I think Greg's one of the. He posts some of the simplest but most impactful advice on networking, and he always talks about dormant ties, your low-hanging fruit. Networking doesn't have to be some hiring manager you've never spoken to in your life. A networking call or a DM could be someone who you already know. So warm up your networking and relationship chops and get yourself out there and ask for advice.
I always tell people, tell your hairdresser you're looking for a job because they talk to everybody.
Oh, what a good idea.
Right? Like, especially women, like you get in the chair and you're gabbing away, like start telling the people who are naturally, you gotta, I guess maybe another hangout, but you gotta tell people where you are, that you're looking. And it doesn't have to be this contrived, like put on a name badge, go and eat some appetizers at a whatever, or send a LinkedIn to a hiring manager. There's so many smart, simple ways. And like you're talking about Greg, you said a lot of his stuff is really simple, like in the best way. And I find that I don't know how you choose to work with clients, but oftentimes with clients, I find I'm pulling them back saying, we just need to keep this simple. Like what works. And you don't have to turn it into something more than that. It doesn't have to be cute and tricky to work.
At all.
Yeah.
No. And I respect the fact that might seem like I'm being kind of blasé, and I don't mean it that way. And I hope I didn't disrespect anyone by that kind of tone, but it is simple. It's not easy, Erin. It's something that I really stress with clients to be like, if we decide to move forward, and if this is a fit, then, this is not going to be easy at all. Like, to get through my clarity phase can take people, it took one of my clients 4 weeks to get through my clarity phase, and my entire package is 8 weeks long.
Yeah.
So sometimes it can take some people a really long time to let go of old habits. Like the clarity phase for any coach, it should be the hardest part because it requires not just learning new strategies and new ways of questioning yourself, but letting go of a ton of stuff that you've held on to because you may have gotten an interview request 6 months ago, but it was something, right? Like, so you're holding on to that white knuckling, something that didn't go anywhere.
Yeah.
So that part for me is huge. But yeah, it's simplicity is key, and especially with someone with, if someone's got the kind of brain I have, it's very easy to feel overwhelmed. So easy to feel overwhelmed. Like I caught myself. For example, I recently sent a proposal to a client that was spoken to twice. Perfect client for me. And I was reading through the proposal and I was like, started feeling something like, I was like, spell checking and stuff. And I started feeling a little bit weird, like a third of the way down. And I thought, this is too long. If I'm feeling this. So I scrapped the whole thing, started from scratch. I'm like, this needs to be palatable. It needs to be bite-sized, intentional and detailed, but it needs to be bite-sized because we can get overwhelmed super quick. So yeah, simplicity is key. And yeah, it's something that's thrown around a lot, especially people going through the LinkedIn feeds, right? But like, what does it really mean? But I think if you go a little deeper and realize that it's, what does it mean to you? What does simplicity mean to you? And how can you, shed everything else?
I love the simplicity call out, and yet you're right. It's good to call out. You earlier on you said something about it's not like we're not saying simple equals easy
At all. It's hard
but
work, but it's simple.
It's really clean steps, and they're intentional and purposeful. And oftentimes, again, the like streamline. I'm going to be honest with you. I just totally lost my train of thought because Richie just made a comment. Wasn't Richie Limpani on this show? Hard to follow that guy. David must be brave. So we were having a nice conversation.
I would just say the same thing to you.
Up.
Following Richie is like big shoes. Following Richie on one of these things. Hey, Richie.
I'm going to give Richie a hard time because we were just talking about you, Richie, before we were getting ready, saying
like, where's
how much
the bear
we
onesie?
Where's the bear onesie? And I said, yeah, Richie seems like he's toned it down a little, and here you are heckling us. So,
what's up, Richie?
Anyways, So, anyways, all of that, the simplicity of it all, like it's a lot of work. There are simple steps that work, and I think the benefit of a coach and working with somebody is finding somebody who understands how to follow those simple steps, but then really aligns to you and understands you. So I'm using this as a segue because I think I want to talk a little bit more about you align and you speak a lot to folks who do deal with ADHD tendencies in their life and how that might impact their job search. And so I think that that's a really important part for us to key in on here is tell me a little bit about what that's been like for you as an individual and how you navigated that. And then really how you're bringing that as you coach, like what sort of changes, differences do you really see yourself making in your coaching that helps folks who might be dealing with some amount of ADHD?
I don't know if you noticed or if anyone noticed, but I let out a big breath and a sigh when you asked that question. And I want to explain why. So when I think about my old job search, I feel this tightness in my chest. And it's because I recall how I felt in the process at whatever stage I was at. But when I was in the process, there were so many, maybe it's because I was a recruiter and I kind of knew what was about to happen. But having said that, even as a recruiter, I was nervous as heck. I felt super lost. Job search was hard for me, Erin. And it was because it's really easy. And I just want to say this too. I just want to caveat. I'm very new to my recent diagnosis. I was only diagnosed last August, so I'm still trying to figure out a lot of things, feelings and emotions and triggers and, therapy. Thank you. Right. So I'm still trying to figure some of this out. So, whoever's watching, your mileage might vary, and I respect that immensely. But I still feel anxious about the way I used to feel looking for work, even though I had, X amount of years in agency recruiting. It didn't really take away the feeling of the pressure behind that, or the feeling that I needed to prove myself, or I needed to have a perfect even back then, perfect resume. I'd spend hours on my resume, Erin, bullet points and making sure everything crazy. And it was exhausting. So I'd hyper focus on these like minute tasks that wouldn't really change any of the outcome. So I was super stressed looking for work throughout my entire career, just really stressed out. The overwhelm of just thinking about what's going to happen. And then, some people with ADHD, they'll suffer from RSD, rejection sensitivity dysphoria, which is, for some, I don't think I've experienced that at this level, but for some, I understand, can manifest as a physical pain. Even just the thought of being rejected after submitting an interview can send someone in a spiral. I have not really been there. So I can't really speak to how it affected me in that fashion, but I can understand how it would have felt, because I was always afraid of being rejected. And because then you go into this kind of, what did I do wrong, or what is wrong with me, really quickly. And then that can spiral into it. Just the wheels come off. The wheels come off of everything. So yeah, really challenging, Erin, on an emotional level. It's like outside of the logistics, the objective logistics of a job search. Once that layered kind of emotion, just dysregulation starts setting in, it's really hard to control it. So to your second point, or your second question, I want to kind of bring in what we talked about before you drop that question: simplicity and simplifying my process. For example, if I were to go back to, I'm shuddering inside, if I had to go back to corporate America, one of the first things I would do is completely simplify my process. I'd actually use my own process. I teach my clients what I use to build my business, to draw in particular professionals that I want to either connect with, build relationships with, generate interest, visibility. So I would follow my own steps, and I've made them super simple that they can be done without the feeling of overwhelm, that have a general undertone of accountability. I do what is termed as body doubling sessions. So, my one-on-one coaching sessions include the concept of body doubling. And what's body doubling? It's accountability. You and I are doing it now, right? It's the process of helping. And I do it sometimes with myself, or I'll get a friend, or even my wife sometimes. Like, can you sit across from me while I do this project? You don't have to say anything. You don't have to do anything. But can you, just knowing you're there, not even watching me, but just knowing you're there, I can fire through something without getting distracted or getting overwhelmed. It's an interesting process.
Yeah.
Again, I want to say that this is something that I'm still learning to incorporate in my own life, and I'm seeing massive benefits from it. So yeah, but simplicity, Erin. And to something you said earlier about, I don't know if we were on camera at the time, but you mentioned we were speaking to your hairdresser, like sharing your journey. I think is a really important part of kind of unloading some of the weight, right? Because you've been a candidate in your career more than once. I have, and I've been, we've both been job seekers, and it's not easy. People throw around the word brutal, but it can be less. It doesn't tickle, right? But it can, it can hurt a little less if you try and simplify the process, asking the right questions to the right people. And I think more often than not, Erin, I don't think people are asking themselves the right question. Really, it's this. What do you want to do? Is such a loaded echo chamber, vacuous question. It's like it doesn't really mean anything.
Yeah.
What do I want to do? I want to be an astronaut. I want to fly planes. But what do I really want to do? It requires,
right.
I don't want to work, but I want to make $1 million a year, right? It's like you've got to be realistic. But I think it takes emotionally driven questions to kind of bring out a different emotional response versus answering some kind of boilerplate objectivity-based questions, because they are not helpful at all.
Yeah, it's so funny you're talking about this. I was having a FaceTime earlier today with former client turned friend. She's in her career, and she's hitting this point where she's like thinking it's time for what's next. And there's a little more behind it, just maybe some urgency, and you could see the emotions starting to swell up around this whole thing of like, I might need to make this move sooner rather than later. And
Yeah.
it was interesting to watch the simplicity leave the room and the emotion and that swirl start to take over, to the point where we weren't really talking about anything that was making a decision, getting us closer to where we needed to be.
Perfect.
And it was like, what do I want to do next? And what are the options? And I'm like, well, everything is not an option, right? To your point, like maybe astronaut somewhere in some parallel universe is an option, but that's not an option right now. That's not what we're talking about. So let's start to take some of those things away and come down to what really matters. What are we driving towards in this next decision? What's the goal here? What does happy
How do you
look
want
like?
to feel next? How do you want to feel next in your next opportunity?
Yeah.
What do you want it to make you feel? Yeah.
I oftentimes say, like, envision this all happens and you're sitting wherever it is next. Like, what are you doing? What do you feel like?
Yeah.
What does it look like? What are you making?
Why did you move there? Yeah. Why did you say
like,
yes to the offer?
Let's talk about these things and start to almost reverse engineer what our decisions and our next steps are based on how you want to feel. And it does seem like so often people, and rightfully so, I think it's natural to look at everything around you and think, OMG, like, what do I do?
Yeah.
Instead of saying, let's start with the end in mind.
Yeah.
Know what that is. And then let's start to work backwards of what would a person, there was a coach that I used to listen to, and she used to really push hard on, you don't have to have the answer. You just have to know what's one next step you need to do in the direction of where you want to go. Just take one next step and then look around and go, what's my next step? So tell me, you touched, I don't remember how you said it, but I want to come back to this. You had said something to the effect of like some questions that you talked with clients about, and as you're going through this clarity process with them. Clarity comes up a lot in conversations I have as well, and a lot, with potential clients. Tell me a little bit about if someone is struggling with clarity, like what do I want to do next? What's next for me? Maybe it's some of the stuff we just mentioned, but what are some of those really important questions, or what's like one question you'd want someone to be asking themselves to be down the right path?
I've already mentioned one, which is the one that I was asked in 2018. And I ask all of my, prospective clients this about, what is the one thing about your career so far that you would be disappointed in losing in your next job? It's a really great, the fear of loss mindset invokes an emotional response. And once you start speaking about how it would make you feel losing something, it changes the route that you take, right? From further conversation. So it pulls you away from the objectivity of what do you really want to do to how would you feel if you lost this thing? And it's a different mindset. But one question that I like to ask, and it seems a little weird in the beginning, but I break it up into two parts. And I ask the question, I give my own personal context, and then I ask them to kind of like, so now explain that to me. So the question goes like this. What did you want to be when you were a kid? What did you want to be when you were growing up? And then I asked them to, pause and think while I give you a little context. And I talk to them about my experience as a young boy. My younger brother grew up around a very loving mom, and she would take us to these annual air shows where we'd see Concorde and, Hercules bombers and things like that. It was just a really, really cool experience. And I'd gotten it into me. I still look back and I'm like, yeah, exactly how I felt. I wanted to be a pilot. I wanted to fly planes because that's what I saw, right? And we'd go every year. So we'd go to like the tents, we'd see like the recruiters and the engineers and everybody, as well as the pilots. But I had this dream that I wanted to be a pilot my entire childhood. And I'm going to fast forward for the sake of brevity. So in one of my therapy sessions late last year, we talked about my career. And I'd mentioned, as a kid, I always wanted to be in the Air Force, but I wanted to be a pilot. And because she had all these notes on me, she looked at me and she said, "Are you sure it was that?" I got a little bit, what do you mean? I know what I wanted. You didn't know me when I was 8. But she dug into, she kind of forced me into a place to not really focus on the what, but the why. And we talked about it for like an hour. I went over my hour session. We talked. It was very moving, but this big light bulb went off. And the reason it went off is because she explained to me the why. And the why, and I look back, every time I talk about this, I'm like, oh my God, like why couldn't I just sooner, right? I would have loved to have known this sooner. So the reason I wanted to join the military, or the Air Force specifically, A was Air Force because of the air shows every year. It wasn't Army or Navy. So it was air shows. So it was pilot. But the reason my brain wanted to follow that career was because of the way my brain chemistry works. My ADHD. I crave conformity. I crave rules. I crave structure, format, discipline. There's a list, right, of military life. That is this specific box of rules, structure. Everything's formulaic. I'm in a uniform every day. I'm told what to do, when to do it, how to do it, right? This light bulb went off. And I was like, wow. I, of course, contextualize my side of the story super short, but in these calls with my prospective clients, I'm like, okay, so now, let's talk about why you wanted to be. I had one person say to me they wanted to be a waitress. And I was like, amazing. And I was like, wrote it down. I was like, I'm going to come back to that. And we went through this whole concept of her just wanting to be the center of a support system. Turns out, of course, she was in UX or customer experience. I was like, of course you want to be a waitress. It's perfect. It's the why, not the what. Someone else. So some of the answers, I kind of boilerplate. I'm like, no, what did you really want to be when you grow up? It's embarrassing. What was it? And it usually leads to something that is this root passion. And it's not because it's a vocational answer. It's a feelings answer, Erin. Yeah. No one's asking questions about how they feel. And we felt this way. I'm not a scientist, by the way. We felt this way since we were kids. So why not tap into that? I want to remind everybody, as a 53-year-old adult, why would I go down that route unless I was, encouraged to or forced to, encouraged to on therapy, during therapy. And I was like, oh my God, there's a light bulb that went off. So I actually asked that question now from my own therapy sessions. I'm like, it makes so much sense. I believe it. And every single time I've asked this question, it's got to be like over 20 times now. Every time, all 20, we've come up with this twist of the why. And it just gets people thinking.
Yeah. Well, because
feelings.
I was going to say it's the feelings and we're not
tapping into them enough. We're tapping into the objectivity of a job.
No, right. I mean, when you think of feelings, you'd think most of the time, like think how often we're told, like, check your feelings at the door when you go to work or in your career, right? You need to put your feelings to the side.
Nobody cares about how you feel. Do the job. Exactly.
Yeah, right. And so there's sort of this ingrained idea that feelings don't have a place, especially in career. And what I would say is, holy crap, they drive everything you do in your career. You just don't 100%. Know it.
Right. Because ultimately when you put them to one side and you take a job for money or something, formulaic, right? Because like, oh, my resume fits the job description, must apply, gets the job, goes to work. You soon realize, I'm sorry for that impression, by the way.
It was really good.
It's something I do with my daughter, Robo-Dad. Different conversation. So, but once the honeymoon period is over, you go back to feeling the way you were when you first started your search. And it's like, hello, reality. Guess what? You're still not happy inside. You're good at your job. You're making your money. They think you're good at your job. They're going to keep paying you salary, but you're not happy. And again, that's not like an exact science, just my own experience and experience of others that I've spoken to. But oh my God. Like, and I want to stress this too. This is, your mileage may vary. You might be right out of school and like, I want to be a doctor. Boom. Did it good. Congratulations. Best of luck. You probably will crush it and be happy. But, I found that mid-career, I'm like 10 years before retirement, right? So like mid-career professionals, there was a question my wife asked me about 4 years ago. And I was talking about starting my own firm, right? And I was like, putting it off, imposter syndrome, just, everything, as you can imagine, like just, I was building walls around me to not do something, procrastinating. And she said, if you got another agency, you'll probably do really well, but you'll never start your own thing. And I was like, okay. And then she said, if not now, then when? And it just, it hit me. And I spent all weekend thinking about it. She said that on a Friday. And by Monday, I was like, damn. And I had a final interview with an agency in New York City, I forget the name. And they wanted to talk numbers at lunch. So I knew I was getting an offer. And I called my recruiter who I'd gotten the interview through and said, Mark, if Mark's listening, I'm sorry, by the way. I've already apologized. Mark.
Sorry, Mark.
I've had a week. Mark's amazing, by the way. I had a weekend epiphany and please pull my interview. I'm going to launch my own firm. So I launched my own staffing agency, naively, may I add. But it kind of proves the point, right? So me starting my own agency, I thought it was like the grass is green. I just need to do my own thing. Guess what? I hated recruiting, the same as I hated it for 16 years prior. So, I crossed paths with a mentor who's been a mentor for many years, and they asked me that question, this kind of crossroads question. What is the one thing about your career that you'd be disappointed in losing if you couldn't do it again? And my instant response was working with candidates or job seekers. Instant. And then we built the conversation from there. Yeah, it was like that was the turning point, Erin, from agency recruiting to coaching. I looked at learning and development. I looked at internal corporate L&D. I looked at, internal TA like you've come from, which is a very, very hard job. I think it's harder than agency because you have hiring managers breathing down your neck. I really don't. But coaching felt good. And I went with the feelings. And then I was 48. It's like, I'm getting on a bit. Time I made a grown-up decision and step out of, it's not easy for everybody that, there's financial components involved and, making a big leap. It's, you're running a little bit of a risk, but I think if you align yourself with the right people, it doesn't have to be a coach. It could be, you could have a friend who's been replaced by a recruiter who was good, who's willing to listen, willing to maybe tweak their resume a little bit for them. Cause that's what I used to do. That's what I used to do. If I get a, a half decent looking resume, but I could read between the lines and like, wow, if they work there, then they must be phenomenal. Let's bring them in and have a chat. I'd fix their resume for them, Erin. I'd fix their resume for them. I'd have to because I'd be sending it to someone like you, right? Who'd read me out if the resume was, not up to par. So I think there are resources out there that will help you. You've just got to ask. And I think there's a way of asking. And, this is not a networking conversation, but you get the rest.
You've touched on this a couple times about your age and being mid-career and, making some of these shifts in your career. And, I work largely in the world of pivoters. That's
Same.
really the space of, that majority of my clients find themselves at a crossroads.
Yeah.
And it's interesting to me how ashamed so many people are that they've changed their minds and that they're and I guess I don't even know what the question is, but I guess maybe what's your advice there? Because what I see is when there's something taught to us, just like your emotions don't belong in work, there's also this thing of like, once you make a choice, if you change your mind, you're a failure. And I think it couldn't be further from the truth that so oftentimes I see people making not the ideal choice because they're trying to stay small so people don't notice that they've changed their mind and that changing your mind means you got it wrong or something.
Yeah, it's a good point. It's a good point.
So I guess my question to you, or I'm curious on your thoughts around when you encounter clients and they're at this crossroads of change, what does that conversation look like? What worries are they bringing to you? Kind of some of the ones that I just shared that I see when I talk with clients, but what worries are your clients bringing to you when they're at that crossroads and how are you navigating that?
It's usually comp is usually the biggest objection. Like if I go from 20 years doing this to pivoting assumedly successfully into another realm completely, the assumption is I've got to take a pay cut. And I appreciate the logic behind that, but that's not an exact math. It doesn't work that way. Look, I think career pivoting is, I say these words deliberately, but with respect. Career pivots are a luxury for those who are currently employed. And I say luxury because when you have a steady stream of income that can pave the way for the runway to start a pivot, because it's not, if you're pivoting, if there's a significant pivot, you're probably not getting that job by a resume or an application. It requires deeper work, getting really clear on what you want to do, making sure your resume and LinkedIn profile are cohesive, sending the same message, right? Speaking to the right people in that field. So if you're moving from, BA to project management, you want to be speaking to project managers. You don't waste your time speaking to BAs. You know what I'm saying? So, and I like this phrase, dress for the job you want, not the one you have. It applies to mostly, when people are looking to climb the ladder.
Yeah.
But also it works moving careers. Like you dress your resume and LinkedIn profile and how you speak and how you engage and how you share, comments, or if you're bold enough, write your own content or come to me and I'll ghostwrite it for you. But you're speaking to that, not to this. So, but yeah, comp is a big pushback. I can't afford, like, it's almost like, it's like a script. I want to go from this to this, but I can't afford a pay cut. I'm like, show me the data that backs that statement up, because it's not really always the case. It's a logical objection. I get it. But I think all pivots, any pivot within reason is completely doable. It's about how you identify the expertise that relates to the pivot, and then you strategically rewrite and re-emphasize those skills and those quantifiable metrics that relate. You have to be relatable, because I think you'll appreciate this. I was speaking to a friend about this morning. I think I'll use the word job seekers, but I'm including folks that are both unemployed and employed, because I really don't think there's a big difference other than the the pivot objection. But I don't think a lot of people really understand how recruiters' brains work. And I'm talking internal as well as agency, right? If you understood how just one big component, I think, is making yourself easy to work with. A clear resume, a clear message. Your resume and LinkedIn are saying the same thing. Makes it easy for your audience, recruiters, hiring managers, to understand you, to relate to you. And if that relatability happens, it's, you get a high degree of probability of getting, hey, can we get your availability for an interview next week? Hey, you available to come in next week? Right? It's that simple. It was more of a gut feeling for me, Erin. I was an agency recruiter for about 16 years, and I'd see a resume and it was a gut feeling. I wasn't objectively going through line by line. I wasn't looking for quantifiable metrics at all. I wasn't really looking for alignment and the right bullet size. If it made sense, it made sense. But I think my biggest advice to anyone who's looking to either pivot or even just look for a new job because they've been out of work for a period of time is to start thinking like a recruiter. How do recruiters work? Gut feeling. It's this. I don't want to sound all woo-woo about it, but there's no exact science in how a recruiter
there's not.
goes through a resume. It either feels right or it doesn't. And that, again, that's super nuanced, but I think it ties in nicely to perfectionism. There's no perfect resume. No perfect resume. But the pivot, I think the biggest objection is, I won't get paid as much as I do. And it's like, that's not entirely true.
Why do you think we as the humans so often come up with stories that are completely they're just unfounded, right? Like this whole idea of I can't make a pivot because I won't make what I need to make. Or if I think I need to leave this job, maybe I should just go back and pick something that I used to do because this didn't work out. Or, there's these things that we tell ourselves that are unfounded. There's no logic to it, but we believe them, and we'll change our lives and make big decisions because of them, or avoid big decisions because of them.
I'll tell you why. And it's no secret. I share this a lot. I experienced it personally. 16 years in agency recruiting, wasn't in love with it. I'm not going to say I hated it, because I didn't. I wasn't in love with the job that I had for reasons I've shared earlier. And I was making, I say this respectfully because it's going to sound arrogant, but I was making a lot of money, and the money kept me in that, and it kept me in this, this safe spot. And I was willing to forego the part of my job that I didn't love, right? It's like, this is fine. I'm making X amount of money a year. I was making, money hand over fist. I was, one of the highest billing recruiters at my firms regularly, not all the time, but regularly. And I was doing okay. And one of the biggest questions one of the biggest problems I would convince myself of, based on data that I probably pulled out of somewhere dark or was comparing myself to other people, was, could I afford to leave recruiting? Could I make this amount of money elsewhere? The fact of the matter is, probably, but there'd have to be some compromise somewhere. And I think for me, it started with, what am I willing to compromise on, and what am I not willing to compromise on? Non-negotiables. There is so much about this. To answer your question specifically,
Yeah.
Feelings. We're human
Yeah.
beings. We are driven by how we feel about things. And especially those who are listening, and we're just riffing on this, especially people with ADHD, we impulsively make decisions quicker than you can blink, Erin. And they can often be the wrong ones or the misinformed ones. I'll just put it that way. So we impulsively come to conclusions and we follow that made up data, or that has to be that kind of impulsive reaction. It's hard. Again, I think it comes down to knowing where you want to go, right?
Mm-hmm.
Resume, LinkedIn, yada, yada, yada. We talk about that. But like, who are you speaking to? Because I think with whom you speak and with whom you want to kind of sidle up next to, and, you know, eventually ask some questions that are a little bit more probing and beneficial for you, takes time. People throw out the word networking the whole time. And networking, if you don't enjoy networking, you're probably doing it wrong. Networking, I think networking is fun. It's work, but what else are you doing? What else are you doing? Sending out 1,000 resumes and getting, 1% ratio, conversion. That's not work.
Yeah.
That's
No.
busyness, and it's not
Yeah.
productive. So I don't know, Erin, I from personal experience, when I got myself in that little tiz in 2018, I was spiraled to a place where I'd convinced myself that I'm never getting out of it. So I'll stick where I am. And I stuck where I was for, a long time. Again, I didn't hate what I did, but I don't know, there was something about it that I was like, this kind of goes, for ADHDers, one of the biggest struggles that, from my own personal experience, one of the biggest struggles I had always had was the motivation to do something that I didn't find interesting. It's one of the basics. And cold calling for new business, and in here in New York City, it's, it's the hedge fund boys, the investment bankers, the, real estate giants, big tech firms that you're familiar with. That didn't interest me. Putting on this kind of like salesy thing and trying to win business and, convince someone, again, over time, I'm not expecting things to happen right off the bat, but I didn't enjoy that, Erin. How long is your list if you wrote a list of the amount of agency calls you used to get on a daily basis? Bonkers, right? I didn't enjoy that part because of that, because I knew, and in your case, Erin Lewber's already had 25 calls that morning and it's only 9:30. Why is she going to listen to me? So I would resist and resist, and I got into trouble for that quite a lot. So I was typically referred to as candidate heavy, because I had way more and deeper relationships with candidates than I ever did with clients. But I think it all comes down to feelings, and it's, you can look at a job search as objective, and I think wanting a job for money should be normalized. I want to make that abundantly clear. I don't think anyone should be shamed because they don't have a dream job. I think that's like, who cares? Who cares? Like, do you, right?
Yeah.
But for those that do want to change, or that there's something just kind of missing, you need to start asking yourself, those types of questions. What did you want to be when you were a kid? And talk to someone else, like riff on these ideas, right? And take my example that I share with clients and kind of use that as a template, if you will, to kind of like, oh, now I understand why that question is important. Or, what is it about my career that I've loved so far that I will be disappointed in losing next? Because my answer to that was instant: job seekers, working with job seekers. And here I am, right? And I say this a lot. It's going to sound cheesy, so cheese alert. I say this where I can, of course. I try and segue it in. But I finally feel that I'm able to do now what I always wanted to do for candidates as a recruiter, but never could. If that makes sense.
Well, I mean, and look at what you just shared, where you said, I really didn't love the business development part of it. I didn't like to be out there, selling and pitching and, doing the whole thing, wheeling and dealing. You always have been rooted in
structure,
the candidate, and you said you're candidate heavy, and now you really can be that. You've chosen and you've placed yourself in an environment where you're completely like team candidate, right?
Yeah.
And I think when we talk about career alignment for people, because I hate dream job as well. I hate the dream job thing because I don't think people intentionally try to do this when they say dream job. I think there is a lot of, good intent there, but one, a job is a means to an end, right? It should enable your life. and empower you to do what you want to do in your life. But
Yeah.
this idea of alignment of a job, something that sits well with you, something that you show up as you and the things that you're interested in and the feelings and the emotions that you do carry, they sort of get scratched by when you go to work, you get that good feedback, so that not that the hard days don't exist, but that when the hard days happen, and you have them, I have them, even though you're in a role that you love,
Yeah.
you're sort of able to deal with it and roll with it differently
Yeah.
because it's generally still aligned with you.
Yeah.
You're not at
I
this
think
constant tension and fighting.
100%. I think my job now, the 4 years I've been a coach, is way harder than my 16 years as an agency recruiter. Harder being, a
Yeah.
subjective term, right? I agree with you. And I also want to kind of raise the meme that's thrown out all the time. Find a job you love and you never work a day in your life. I think it's BS. It's hyperbole.
Yeah.
It's LinkedIn content fodder that gets a lot of engagement, so people will use that. It's like, I think it's complete BS, because I work my ass off as a coach. I pour my everything into what I do. Like, I don't just talk to people and help people through their roadblocks and identify the career path that they have, desired for 10 years but didn't know how to get through. That's like 10% of what I do, maybe 15. Like, there's all the back end stuff, and there's a lot, and anyone who's watching, if Richie's still here, there's a lot. And, Richie runs a more than a one person shop. So there's a lot of moving parts.
Yeah.
And, my current job isn't a dream job, but I do finally feel that I'm able to do what I'd always wanted to do, ideally, as a recruiter for candidates, but never could. So I like the dream job. Can I segue too?
Yeah.
You ready for this?
Yeah.
Drop dream job. Start thinking and talking about dream adjacent. What's dream adjacent? Easy. Your dream job is probably super focused, super linear, 2 layers maybe, right? It's like super, there's this, like, you can see the DNA, you're zoomed in so close, right? It's like, this is what I want to do. I can tell you the function, I can tell you everything that I want, I can tell you the comp, I can tell you the location, I can tell you how much commute I want, right? All that. It's like, okay.
Yeah.
It's over. I'm feeling overwhelmed even just saying those things. And I'm sure if people are watching, they're like, enough, right?
Yeah.
How about you zoom out? How about you zoom out a level and look at job family versus job function? So once you kind of zoom out and look at, like, okay, so what I do as a core professional, right, in my line of work, here's what I do, but let's broaden it, not go wide. Let's broaden it just one level and look at what's adjacent to what I think I would love. Because if you can get close to a dream adjacent role, you're still kind of in that vicinity, that kinesphere of something that you've clearly identified you love, but it's less pressure, Erin. There are typically more opportunities with something that's adjacent versus super focused. So, and it also still falls in line with the one path principle mindset that I teach in my clarity session. It's like, it scares the bejesus out of a lot of people. It's like one resume, one path, one clear direction. And it's like, people get hives. Like, oh my God, I'm sweating. And like, let's talk about what this is and why it works. So it's all about, I think it all boils down to feelings. And I think too many people pay too much attention, ADHD or otherwise, pay too much attention to their feelings in the negative or what they don't have versus what they already have, and to transition that to something relatable to their what's next. I keep pointing this way. This is forward for me.
Yeah.
Right?
That's a wonderful observation. You're right, because I can just think of, in the last 2 weeks, the number of conversations I've had where somebody inventories it's the strangest experience. They inventory from a place of, well, here's what I know and here's what I lack.
Yeah.
And then there's like this obsession around the lack, instead of looking at it. And I would say that's a lot of the work that I end up doing in my practice with people, is saying, let's take inventory of everything you've done. And once we know what you're going after next, how do we start to retell that story and reinvent? And I love just listening to people talk, because as they talk, they reveal themselves, the stuff that they don't know they're saying, right?
Yeah.
Like, they don't know that they're telling you all this wonderful stuff.
Yeah.
And at the end, I'm like, so it sounds to me like you really like helping people and you love being organized, but you don't, want to do these 3 things here. And it seems like everybody who you shared this about always comes to you when they have a problem and you always know the solution. And they're like, yeah, actually.
Mhm.
And it's amazing that they don't see themselves. I think this was before we started talking. I said, my little saying is, you're weird as you're wonderful. It's
Yeah.
the stuff that you have inside that you become a little blind to, or that you almost hide from the world because you think, well, I don't know, that doesn't fit the standard. Um, but honestly, as people talk and as they think about what they want to do next in a career and what aligned looks like or adjacent looks like,
Yeah.
it's those things. And it's less about the lack and needing to put that aside, actually, so that you can say, what's going to align and be fulfilling for me? What inventory do I have? And how do I start to really honor that inventory? And I would love to see more of that from more people, is honoring the path that they've built, because it does not, it's not nothing, no matter what you've done. I struggled with that a lot in my early
Mhm.
years. I came from the retail world.
Yep.
I ran a grocery store and I could not tell you the number of things that I was responsible for. I was in charge of a $30 million P&L. I
Yeah.
stocked the groceries on the shelf. I plunged the toilets. I managed a staff of 100 people. I planned events. Like, I didn't know how to take all of this and make it mean something. So it felt stuck.
Yep.
And I just love the conversation when you're talking with a client or someone who as they share, you're like, wow, I can totally see you the way you don't see you.
It's, yeah, you hit the nail on the head. I've had similar conversations, and here's my take on that. And I think why a lot of people, when they work with someone like, or just even not working with you, like I sometimes I reveal this stuff on my free chemistry calls. It's like, away you go. You probably don't need me. You just needed validation, which I think I still class that as a good call. I look at them as networking calls above all. But my point is this. I think a lot of folks who, specifically those who are looking to pivot, I think they've gotten to a point where they've convinced themselves that they're either not good enough or they lack, they're comparing to other people that are already in that job. It's like, well, it's an interesting concept. And I think what a lot of people really don't appreciate is that the reason for a lot of these blockers is that they're keeping what they really want to themselves because they're too afraid to say it out loud through fear of disappointment, or in most people's cases, further disappointment, right? The ghosting, the rejections, comparison. 2 people left my firm already and they're like crushing it. Well, from your perspective, they might be crushing it, but they're probably miserable. Who knows, right? But it's like comparison is awful, and it will keep a lot of people in place. But I think there's this, and I still do it. I'm a dad now, so I do it all the time. It's like I'm afraid of saying something out loud for fear of it not working out, or for a feel of out of fear of it not happening, right? So I'm like, it's much safer for me to not say it. And I think if you have the opportunity to speak to not even someone like us, Erin, but just a neighbor, or like you said, the hairdresser, a person you've seen like for the 15th time on your train into work, so there's some familiarity. Maybe you can kind of like unload that day, right? Maybe you've had enough. And speak to other people, because I think the more you talk about the things that you're burying, so like a therapist now, but I think the more you get an opportunity to talk about the things that you really enjoy, not do, enjoy, you'll start to say these things out loud a little bit more. And I find through conversations, whether it's a chemistry call or whether it's client that's like knee deep in my clarity process, it's like they finally start. It's like you said, this stuff starts coming to the surface. Like, okay, now we can get to work, because you're saying the things out loud, whereas you've kept them secret for so long. So you had this like internal battle of, especially ADHD, is procrastination, rejection sensitive disorder. It's like you won't do something. Some people, including myself, some people won't even action on the small step you mentioned earlier for fear of failing. So they won't even try, and they are stuck in this cage, this prison of just overthinking and overthinking and overthinking. It's this busyness that goes on in our heads, but nothing ever gets done. And I think it's really hard for people, specifically with ADHD, to break away from that alone. look, I'm going to be really honest with you and everyone. I haven't shared this with you, Erin. I just think it's, it's irrelevant, but I'm going to bring it up. I'm medicated. I was prescribed medication. I was very lucky. I take like entry-level low dose medication. And I was extremely lucky. I consider myself so lucky that I feel privileged to have gotten the right prescription this early. Doesn't make anything go away. It calms it a little bit. So like instead of my 20 squirrels running around a tree, I have 20 squirrels sitting on branches, chilling out, right? They're still there. My thoughts are still there, but they're way more manageable. But what it didn't take away from me was, or what it didn't improve over anything else, was me speaking about my challenges, whether it's with therapy, whether it's even with folks like you, or as I mentioned in my post today on LinkedIn, two friends of mine, Tom Woodhams and Clay, who they've shared their ADHD journeys for a long time. And I stumbled upon their content about 6 months before I had the courage to seek my own diagnosis. It changed everything for me. So, but the moral of that story is, sit and learn. Try and kind of embed yourself with people that have maybe come through the struggles. And I think it ties into knowing where you want to be, right? Back in mid 2024, I wanted to feel better about myself. I wanted to not have these challenges. So before I, pulled the trigger and went to see a specialist, I kind of segued and ingratiated myself into people like Clay's and Thomas's lives, passively, soaked in their content for a few months and then sent them DMs, mostly, thank you for that post. It just spoke to me, and I built relationships with these guys. And there are others along the way, but Clay and Tom were like super pivotal with me finding some direction or some clarity on my direction, and then the courage to approach the next step. So yeah, it's hard. It's hard for people with ADHD, specifically those who are undiagnosed and unmedicated, to kind of break away from that. But my biggest advice to anyone is, if you can spend 30 minutes, set a timer, set a Pomodoro. I think Chrome has a Pomodoro extension where you just click a button, 20 minutes and then 5-minute break, right? Do these in chunks, and find people who are in your next or desired niche, right? So if you want to be a project manager in tech, go and find those people. Sit back and read their content. Sit back and, read the comment threads, learn some stuff. Look, my biggest advice is throw yourself in to the conversation, add some comments, jump onto that moving train, as I like to call it, because there are moving trains. There are thousands of them on LinkedIn, and each one of them has something that I think can benefit you, especially from a job seeker's perspective, for real.
I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but it's 1:04 p.m., which means our
Why is that
lunch
bad
break
news?
is, because we're done. We ran out of time, and I could just keep talking to you. I feel like
Yeah,
we
me
just
too.
hit that was
Like
beautiful.
I just
What
hit
you
this moving
just
train stride,
I
right?
know.
Yeah.
I feel like we were just really getting into it here. And
Yeah.
I want to offer you the compliment that, when I asked you to be on, when we were talking about this before we went live, and I said, one of the things I really liked is your authenticity. And it's something I've always valued. And I think that it's something that I strive to try to share with others. And I think you do a really good job of that. And
Thank you. I really appreciate it.
when I always ask people at the end of the show or live or whatever we call this thing, for a piece of good advice. But a piece of advice that I'm going to give, because I noticed you doing it and I want to call it out, is that when you figured something out, or when you started to make some progress towards something in your life, share that in a way you're comfortable. But that's the weird is your wonderful thing. It's like, share that. You shared your journey with ADHD and how that has felt for you. And just like you mentioned that you found people on LinkedIn who were having these conversations that made you go, okay, like maybe I need to pursue some of these other diagnoses for myself and things like that. They were an archetype or a future version of you, in a sense, that you wanted to move toward. And I think what you just did here, hopefully, is that you've shared a version of that maybe someone else connects with it and says, wow, okay, David did this. what does this mean for me?
You know, my favorite word of all to tie that in is validation. I felt validated by reading other people's content and, you know, putting myself in their stories, right? Through their words. I was like, I could see myself. And I was like, oh my gosh, they're talking about something that I just experienced last month. Yeah. So validation, and look, I hate to minimize the power of LinkedIn, but that stuff is out there for free. You don't need a premium account. You got a free account, and just hit follow, hit the bells, hit the double bell, by the way, hit the notification bell, and let this information come to you, and just, you know, take your time if you can. I get that. Some people, you know, have a sense of urgency, but validation for me, I look back and like what they wrote about was so validating for me that it reduced the feeling of pressure to seek professional advice. And it was the reduction in pressure that allowed me to pick up the phone and say, hey, do you take Blue Cross Blue Shield? Right? It's like, and then everything else was like, and it's still, I feel like the door has still just a crack open, because I have so much that I'm still learning from a lot of other people that are smarter than me, that are better coaches than me, that are just, you know, versions of me that I would love to be, or close to that. So yeah, validation for me was big, Erin. So yeah, thank you for saying that. Massive compliment. Absolutely. Thank you for saying that.
Of course. Okay, so really quickly, Ben put a question. So it's a quick question.
Yeah.
Does open to work on LinkedIn look desperate, or is using that a good idea if looking for work?
Do you want to go first?
I'm happy to. I'll go first. Does it make you look at?
You go.
I was going to do rock, paper, scissors, shoot. We'll decide.
You go, because you're an ex, you know, internal TA, massive company background. So like, I think we'll agree.
No, I do not think it makes you look desperate at all. I think it's innocuous, frankly. I don't think it does or doesn't do anything. What I know I've seen is that in a employer's market where there are a lot of folks looking for work, and many times folks who have life that they need to continue to provide for, families, mortgages, all the things. When you use the open to work banner, what I think I want people to be careful of is to know that it does create a very open flag that says, I am looking. And so I've noticed that many of my clients have received more inbound garbage, not real opportunities, solicitations that are, I'm going to try to steal your identity, or we want to interview you. We just need you to put your social security number in this.
Here's my WhatsApp. I mean,
it's shady stuff. And so that banner can sometimes just create a very open and obvious signal that you're looking, and maybe you might be ready to say yes to something that in a clearer mindset, you'd ask a few more questions before you'd say yeah.
Correct.
So I always say turn it on in the background. That tells recruiters that you're open. Yeah. And then you just make the decision for you if you choose to turn it on. I don't think you look desperate with the little banner. I just think you need to have that, like, pay attention as you're walking through the parking lot for the weird people hiding, you know, behind the cars.
My brain literally just my comm squirrels just literally went to a parking lot. Looking left and right, because I was in Costco yesterday.
Yeah, with the lights, and it's dark, and you're walking through, and
it's dark too. Forget it.
Yeah, it was dark. It's evening time, so you gotta head on a swivel.
I agree with you.
I agree with you 100%.
So look, the reason I wanted you to go first, because if I had gone first, it'd have been like, so I have a chance to calm down a bit. All right.
Yeah.
Ben, great question, by the way, and I'm sure everyone asks this question, at least, you know, internally, or they share it externally. That particular type of content that folks see in their feeds is usually written because the algorithm sucks up all that engagement, because it's such a contrarian point of view, i.e. BS, that people will engage with that. Now, here's something that people need to know about LinkedIn, the LinkedIn algorithm. I'm not a science guy, but I'm a logic guy. LinkedIn's algorithm cannot differentiate between good engagement and shitty engagement. So something contrarian like that, something that's going to ruffle the feathers of the entire job-seeking community, is going to do well and get pushed onto everybody's feed because, oh my gosh, people are engaging on it, so it must be good. No, it's a garbage post. Yeah. That's a whole different, like cleaning your feed is a whole different conversation.
It is. Right? It is.
But like you said, you can turn the banner off and still be open to work. And I think not many people know this. I'm hoping that you'll back me up on this. If Rich is still here, I hope that he can thumb up. You can be found by that as a filter in LinkedIn Recruiter. So I understand Kelly Rivnak, who a friend of mine, I think she made a post a couple of weeks back. Like, that's one of the first things she does: search by open to work. Because you've got a client who has something that's urgent. Why wouldn't you use that as a filter? So use it. And like you said, to your point, brace yourself, because it's a spam magnet. And but yeah, the post that Ben that you see on your feed and any of those looking in, it's rubbish. It's absolute.
It is. That's a great call out too, about the LinkedIn algorithm. It doesn't assess quality.
Correct.
It doesn't assess quality, accuracy, or truthfulness.
Correct.
in how it amplifies. Yes. And so the more sometimes the more foolish a post is, the more amplified it becomes. And
oh my God.
Yeah.
Where do we draw the line, Erin? ATS bots, beat the bots.
This is where you should do your little robo-dad impression again.
Like, I don't like your resume. Like, come on, man. It's like a human approach to job search. It still exists. And I won't make a big deal out of this, but there was someone on LinkedIn today that I left a comment and very, very professionally pushed back on one of their piece of advice about using ChatGPT to create an ATS optimized resume. I rolled my eyes and then responded, because there is no such thing as an optimized resume for ATS. There are 300 plus ATSs in this planet, and there's no hard rules about what it is to be optimized for ATS. So I'm just saying, people, take what you read sometimes, even if they have 1 million followers, with a pinch of salt. Or you know what? Do due diligence and ask someone who maybe used to be a recruiter, or someone like you used to be internal talent acquisition. It's like, you've got to really look for the source, right? Do your research.
Validate where that's coming from.
Don't believe everything you read.
Yeah. Oh, that's good news. That's good advice. Yeah. We have more questions. Do you want to answer more questions?
I have time. Yeah, look, keep them going.
I've got a few more minutes
still here?
too.
Let's do it.
Yeah, except I think my battery's almost dead, and I had to plug in my microphone
Let's
in
do
the same
one,
thing
let's do one more.
where my battery goes. So
Ben,
I
thanks for
figured
that
that
question.
out. Yeah. Thank you, Ben. That was an excellent question. Okay. So, is there a thin line between communicating who you are and selling yourself?
It's a loaded question.
Can I say what I think?
Yeah, please. You can start. Yeah.
You have a responsibility to tell people the truth about you. And
see my mic?
Dropped. Yeah. And
it is a responsibility. Love that. Yeah.
If you are telling the truth and communicating the great work that you've done, you are naturally going to be, you are inadvertently, or you cannot avoid the fact that you are selling, because that's what sales truly is. Sales isn't the swindly wing, the slick back hair guy selling you a car. Like, sales is education. Sales is information. Sales is solving a problem.
Alignment.
Yes. So to sell yourself, I think that gets, again, that's like a term that's just picked up some sort of ick,
and it
for
gives
some
me
reason.
anxiety even thinking about having to sell myself. It's what I struggled with in 2018. I've got to sell myself. How do I do that? Yeah, it's a really interesting kind of mindset to be in.
Yeah.
100% agree with you. And I think, is it a thin line? No, I think it's a big, fat, thick line, because there is a big difference, as you've just shared. But I think this is going to sound a little bit Larry, but other friends of mine, Pam Skillings and various other interview coaches who I've mad respect for, they kind of hint or imply this, and I go a little bit more in your face, because maybe I'm from Yorkshire in the UK, where we speak our mind. But there is no room for humility in your job search process, and I use those words deliberately. You can still be nice and professional, but there's no room for humility, because someone else who's interviewing for that job is not pulling back. And that's where they're getting offers. And it's not because they're better than you. It's because they interviewed well. They didn't hold back. So, and it might sound harsh, but I really don't think there's a lot of room in the interview process specifically to be humble. You can still be nice and relatable and professional, but leave the humility at the door. Like, what you bring to the table, and it's your responsibility, as you said, to show it. Yeah.
Perrin asked a Follow-up question. If you tell the
Yeah.
truth though, will that work for you or against you? I
What does
guess
that
since
mean?
I'm the one who said, yeah, I guess I would need to know a little bit more about that. I don't mean air your dirty laundry or, that kind of stuff. So, I mean, it's
Hey, I just got out of prison. No.
right, right. Like those might not be the things we lead with, but
Right.
I
This
think it's
tier is
more
a prison
about
tat, but I'm
when I
reformed
say
now.
tell the truth, I say it's about, especially I work with a lot of women and women are very like, well, I don't want to brag and I don't want to sound like I'm taking all the
Yeah.
credit.
Yeah.
It's really more about if you've done it and it really happened, then tell
Yep.
somebody
Yep.
and take the credit. That's what I
Yep.
mean. Like give yourself
100%.
credit for the things that you've done that deserve credit.
Yep.
Maybe don't tell them you've been to prison
Right.
unless they require
My
you to
prison
share
tat.
that.
Yeah. My prison tier.
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, you bring up a good point, and I don't remember who wrote this, but they've dropped it a couple of times, and I really appreciate it. And it's about really understanding that when you're being interviewed, the interviewer is more interested in how you fix the problem versus you and the team where you're at. So
Mhm.
instead of you feeling all humble and you want to kind of lay out some of that, I'm a team player type answer, they don't really care about that unless the question is around, teamwork, but it invariably is not. It's about how have you fixed it and how can you fix it for us? So sure, you may have worked in a team environment that resulted in X. What was your particular part in that? Should be the answer, or leading with that. So yeah, I mean, look, it's, read the room, right? But I
Yeah.
really don't think there's room for humility in its definitive sense.
No, and
No.
there's no badge of honor when you didn't get the job because you held back on stuff
Right.
that, again, you did and was truthful.
Wow, I
Like
hit.
when you're sitting without the job and you're like, yeah, but I didn't brag.
But
Well,
I
maybe
didn't
you should have.
brag. Right.
Yes. And I don't mean that flippantly. I mean, a
Oh,
lot of
I
times I
know.
hear people say that where they're like, well, I just can't brag. I'm like, but we're gonna have to
Where's
work.
the offer? Where's the offer?
Right.
Where's the offer
Like,
based on your being
how
super
many
humble? Yeah.
times do we want to do this loop where we go and do all the work, but then
Yeah.
you hold back on the goodness so that you don't get the reward at the end?
Truth be told, Erin, and I hope that you back me up on this. Truth be told, if you've got your direction, your resume, your LinkedIn profile, and even if you're adding on some kind of engagement passively, they've already got a good idea of you. You've already sold yourself before they even meet you. So I like to call it front loading. If you're front
Yeah.
loading the process with
I like
clarity
that.
and the resume cohesion with LinkedIn,
Yeah.
you've done most of the work. So by the time they reach out and say, hey, you got a couple of minutes next week to jump on a Zoom, they already have an idea of you. You don't need to sell. Everything you've done so far has done it for you. So I think there are many benefits to getting really clear on what you want to do next, confidence being one of them, and kind of front loading the process is another.
I love the front loading. That's great.
Love front loading. I'm a
Yeah.
big believer in doing all the hard work up front.
Yeah. I love
Always,
that.
if you can.
So, all right. One, I noticed, so David and I both before the call used our cups that we had at our desks and then we added our waters to it. So I had a little bit of tea left over in mine and
Why are
I
you
just
doing
added
this?
some water and David added sparkling water to his dirty coffee cup. I noticed, David, that you haven't had a sip of water as we've been talking.
I finished
Really?
it, but I'm like, it's really hard for me to not wince because I still get like a slight taste of coffee in my plain, like no flavor Costco seltzer. It is fizzy. So
Yeah.
why did you have to tell them that? Yeah. It's going to
Because
be our
this is,
secret, Erin.
yeah.
A little bit left.
Cheers. Cheers. This has been a good call. All right. So my battery is going to die. So I guess I got to
All right.
call an end to this.
Yeah.
Two things. So one, I
Yep.
want people to know, where can they, obviously LinkedIn, they can find you on LinkedIn every
Yeah.
day, but
Yep.
like, what's the best way to find you to get in touch with you if they want to chat or
If
learn
they don't
more?
have a
Or,
LinkedIn profile,
yeah.
well, they probably wouldn't know about this, but yeah, you're right. LinkedIn is probably where you'll find me hanging out every day. I'm very active on the platform. So even if you're lurking, reach out to me. My DMs are open. I have premium, so I switch on open profile, which means anyone who's not a first
Yes.
connection can DM me for free. Don't send me an email. It's a waste. Just send me a DM. My website, pathfinder.coach.
I like that.
COACH. Yeah, super cheesy, but easy to
No, I
remember.
like it.
It was for
Yeah.
my own memory's sake because I was forget what I probably do for a living. So pathfinder.coach.
Just affirms every time you say
Yeah.
it.
Yeah. You know, my services are on there. I only have 2 services to not overwhelm you. But yeah,
Love it.
pathfinder.coach. Hit me up on LinkedIn. If you have any questions that we didn't cover on this live session, DM me. I have a hard and fast rule. If I can answer a question in 30 seconds, I'll do it for free. Other than that, you're going to hire me. But
I
kidding
love that.
aside, I'm here to help, man.
Yeah.
It's like I have an ex-recruiter mindset. I want to help people. And again, I know this sounds kind of like, maybe it sounds, I don't know. You know, there's some people out there that think I'm trying to white knight the whole process. It's like, no, I just want to help people. I grew up in a very non-traditional upbringing, struggled financially. You know, my mom was this always help other people in need. And I just kind of grew up in that environment. So I just have this inherent, I enjoy helping other people. I just do. And now I make a great living doing what I've always wanted to do. It's hard work, but I love it. And yeah, you know, and I'll say this, I used to say to my candidates as a recruiter, because you know, I can't place everybody. So I used to say, I don't have to place you to do a good job for you. And I'll say the same thing to people listening in, or people that might be stalking me for the last 3 months and thinking, oh, let me, you know, put a voice to the face that I've been stalking for 3 months. I don't need you to hire me for me to do a good job for you, right? So, you know, not every piece of my advice comes with an invoice. I'm willing to help people who, look, I'll know when you're trying to take advantage of my time, but most people don't. And if you need, you know, a 30-second validation or a 30-second question, DM me.
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah, my DMs are going.
I know you. What a mistake,
Okay.
right? You're going to go back and have.
Yeah.
I know.
Look, I'm here to help. I'm here to help.
Yeah.
I'm not going anywhere. I'm a coach. I'm a recruiter at heart. And if you have a question about anything that I can answer super quick, it's done. And I answer everybody.
All right.
Even if it's no, I can't help you.
Best piece of advice you've either given or received in your life?
Be kind to yourself. It's very hard to not do that with ADHD, especially as a job seeker. Be kind to yourself.
I like it.
What's yours? You weren't expecting that, were you?
No, I wasn't.
It's a great question.
If it were easy, everyone would be doing it.
I like that one.
When you face something that's challenging and it feels like you don't want to keep doing it, but it also feels like the right thing, remind yourself that sometimes everyone isn't doing it because it's hard, and it is hard, and you can do hard.
Are you doing the right thing? Yeah.
Yeah.
If it hurts, you're probably doing the right thing.
Yeah. I also heard someone else say too, if you don't feel like you're going to throw up, you're not pushing yourself hard up, like meaning.
Was that my old CrossFit instructor?
No, it's not in a physical sense, but in that sort of like giving yourself that nervous stir. Like you should challenge yourself enough in life to not become complacent.
Yeah.
And
if it's not going to hurt you, do it.
Yeah. Right. Like know what safe means, but like also sometimes that little weird butterflies in your tummy, like that just means you're doing something outside of what's normal today. And that's where cool things happen.
100%. And I think the best way from a job seeker's perspective, some people are too afraid to make the leap because they don't know how to do it. Find the people that have done it before you. Again, I'll use the BA PM role. If you're a BA looking to be a PM, you don't know where to start, look for PMs who used to be BAs. Done.
On LinkedIn for free.
On LinkedIn for free. You don't need premium for free.
Yeah.
And guess what? If you don't know how to do it, DM me. I'll send you the link to a post where I explained it from a year ago. Done.
30 seconds or less.
Free coaching, free pivot, no money spent, done. Problem solved.
Yeah.
Yeah.
David Hannan, you have been a gem.
Erin Lewber, thank you. I love this. Thanks for.
Me too. We'll have to do this again.
Like I said, I'm following Richie Lampani. I'm like, oh my god.
I know. We should change the name of this to the Richie Show or something at this point because let's be honest, it's all downhill after Richie.
Oh, Lampani and Luba. It has a nice ring to it, right?
It does. It sounds like one of those like CBS murder shows or something, like where we're solving the crime.
Yep.
All right, my friend.
Thank you. Yeah.
Likewise. All right.
Thanks,
everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.
See you later. Bye.